Our Decade to Decade series continues into the 2000s. So to celebrate, we're going back to 1980 with the Coen brothers' best picture, No Country for Old Men. We open the show this week by talking about the tone of the film and where it comes from. We discuss aging characters in a changing world, our lack of control, and the issues some people have with the movie's ending. How did we get here? If you were to ask Anton Chigurh, he'd say something crazy about a coin. And if you ask us, we'd say anything that Anton wanted us to say because, frankly, we're terrified of him. That's this week on Hell of a Picture. Welcome to Hell of a Picture, a movie podcast where we discuss an unforgettable film and if it truly is a hell of a picture. My name is Andrew Bartlett, and I'm sitting across the internet, as I do each and every episode, from the Lewin Moss to my Anton Chigurh, Mr. David Hollinshurst. How are you today?
I'm okay. Yeah, doing quite well. Just sort of digging out from after a storm, and I guess so. You're a psychopath, and you eventually kill me. That's yeah. What a charming friendship we have.
Seems to be though. That's right. I'm on the chase for you, and well, it is what it is, because we're doing.
You had to pick something, so.
Exactly. I wasn't gonna go, Sheriff Ed. Maybe I feel like we're more of the, Anton and was Lewin? No,
Llewellyn.
Llewellyn.
Yeah,
I said
yeah.
Lewin. I think.
Yeah. Well, the way it's spelt, it's very strange, and it's very easy to sort of kind of like contract it into Lewin, but no, it is Llewellyn with three L's. Llewellyn with three L's.
Llewellyn Moss. and a Y.
Yeah.
We're doing No Country for Old Men today. Coen brothers classic. We're coming to the end of our best picture run here. We have two best pictures left. This one's and the one we're going to be doing on our next episode. And man, No Country for Old Men. This is a banger of a best picture, and this is one that I haven't revisited in a while, but somehow has been in my top 10 of films, my favorite, like consistently. When I think about my top 10, for you, you've obviously seen this film before.
Mm-hmm, yeah, a few times, but it had been a while, and
Mm-hmm.
like you say, it's the kind of movie that sticks with you, and
Yeah,
you love it, but I feel like there's a specific mood. There's something daunting about watching this because it is so intense, and I'm not always in a place where I can watch this movie, and I think that's why I don't watch it as much as it deserves. And
right.
we'll get into why that is, and how the film goes about creating that sense. Certainly a big part of it is Anton Chigurh. I mean, it's very, very menacing figure, and not someone you want to just approach on an empty stomach. Say you want to be ready for this movie.
I agree completely. So let's get right into it. Let's begin, as we do each and every week, with the rundown for No Country for Old Men.
The rundown. West Texas in 1980 is not what it used to be, or so say the ancients. Llewellyn Moss is a terse Vietnam veteran who lives a meager but seemingly not unhappy life in a quiet trailer park. Now, one day, while hunting on the desert plains, Llewellyn comes across a drug deal gone bad, and in a stroke of good fortune, he walks off with $2 million cash and no chance of reprisal. But the pangs of a dying man haunt Llewellyn. So in the interest of mercy and against all good sense, he returns to the scene where he is promptly discovered and pursued by members of a Mexican drug cartel who want their money back. Sheriff Ed Tom Bell is a third-generation lawman doing his best to contend with the times. But the times just won't make it easy. When one of his officers is murdered, Sheriff Bell begins pursuit of a man whose psychopathy defies comprehension. This man, Anton Chigurh, in the employ of the drug cartel, is hunting Llewellyn. Now the three men, along with a retired army colonel turned gun for hire, are drawn into an inescapable timeline that carves a bloody swath across the border and back again, leaving carnage, loss, and bewilderment in its wake. No Country for Old Men was released in 2007. It was written for screen and directed by the Coen brothers, Joel and Ethan, and based on a Cormac McCarthy novel of the same name. It stars Javier Bardem as Anton Chigurh, Tommy Lee Jones as Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, Josh Brolin as Llewellyn Moss, and Woody Harrelson as Carson Wells. Now, the 2008 Oscars would bring 5 nominations for No Country and 4 victories. The film would take home Picture, Director, Adapted Screenplay, and Supporting Actor for Bardem. But it would miss out on cinematography for Roger Deakins, a man whose work as a cinematographer and director of photography we have discussed and raved about on this podcast before. You've seen his work in films like 1917, Blade Runner 2049. Go back and listen to that episode if you have not. Sicario, Prisoner, Skyfall, The Shawshank Redemption. I could go on and on and on. He has worked with the Coens on 12 of their 18 films. Now, what makes Deakins' loss at the Oscars shocking, beyond just the quality of his work, is that he was actually nominated twice for this award this year. Yes, Deakins also worked on the sweeping Western The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, giving him 2 out of the possible 5 nominations that year in the category of cinematography. Now, what could possibly deny him? Well, only a similarly gritty Western film, of course. There Will Be Blood by your boy Paul Thomas Anderson, which actually shot concurrently with No Country for Old Men and shared some of its locations, took home the award. And that made 2008 a hell of a year for the modern Western. And that is your rundown.
Yeah, Assassination of Jesse James, very great film and very well shot.
Very well shot. So, I do remember finding it a little ponderous in pace, but there is nothing to be taken away from the beauty of the shoot. It was just gorgeous.
And I remember this Oscars season 2, and it was sort of No Country versus There Will Be Blood. And I love both Paul Thomas Anderson and the Coen brothers. I love both these films, and I was sort of torn on which one I wanted. And I sort of wanted one to win Best Picture, one to win Best Director. Coen brothers obviously took down both. And I still think There Will Be Blood is Paul Thomas Anderson's best film. And I think this is the Coen brothers' best film as well. So, it's deserving. It's just kind of like a shame that Crash won a couple of years before, a few years before. But there are films that won when you're like, any other year, this would have won. But that's the way the Oscars play out.
That's it.
Yeah. So No Country. This is a film, as you said, that is a sort of a heavy watch, and it's a lot to digest. And there's a lot that worked in it. And upon rewatch for me, the first thing that sort of stuck out to me was just the tone of the film, how you sort of feel when you're watching it, and what the Coen brothers are trying to portray. Now, tone is a weird thing with film, right? It's hard to put kind of a idea on what tone is. Sort of similar to like what what an auteur does in a film. Like, what is tone?
Yeah, it's kind of an abstract virtue because I'm not really sure how you create it, but you know it when you hear it, when you see it, when you feel it, and it is all of those things. It's a combination of senses, and it really is this sort of synergistic effect, I think, of setting, of lighting, of sound, of acting, directing. And there are a few filmmakers to me that seem to really get it. Villeneuve for sure. Villeneuve just absolutely understands how to create that. Tarantino as well. And if you needed any convincing that the Coen brothers do, I give you Exhibit A, No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, it is a hard thing to sort of nail down. It's sort of a little bit of all these elements, as you said. It's really that feeling, and it's very much this movie has a feel to it. There's lots of interesting choices that the Coen brothers make here, and it adds to the tone of the film. It's how they raise suspense and tension, and how they keep it, but they also keep it light and funny sometimes. And then there's also these horribly tragic moments. I think for me, as you mentioned in the rundown, the Deakins sort of effect and how he creates the visual palette of the film. But there's also one very distinct choice that the Coen brothers make, and that's sort of like there's no score to the film, and
Mm.
in turn the use of sound, or sort of a lack thereof, or something that we're not used to kind of seeing when we're watching a film, that really creates the tone. It's the silence.
Yeah, that was a question that I had for you actually. Like, is silence a big part of it? Because I think
Yeah.
I feel like it is. And in a lot of the films where that I think of as having a powerful tone, it is as much about the silence as it is the sound. So
Mm-hmm.
when you're in charge of sound on a production, is silence a tough thing to create? Is that something that you can do in filming, or is it something that happens in editing, or is it a combination of post and on set?
Yeah, I think for the Coens in this case, during the production, they never really intended the film to be silent. In what I kind of researched, I think once they got in the editing room and they started putting the film together, they realized how well it worked without a score. And they
Hmm.
were like, the sounds of the winds, that really became the score of the film. And that really placed it in the setting even more. And then I think the silence makes us hyper aware of what's happening in specific scenes.
Yes.
Though the crumbling of that candy bar, like that's such a great moment, and you hear it unraveling a little bit. The phone, I love that moment where the phone is ringing, where Llewellyn is calling the front desk to see if
Mm.
anybody has come, and you can hear the phone ringing on his end, but then you can hear it because it's so quiet. You can hear it down in
Yeah,
the lobby.
that's right.
The sound of this, and then there's like all these like even the sound of a shotgun with a silencer on it going off. That has such a
Hmm.
distinct, unique sound that sort of creates this tone for the film.
Yeah, I mean, Anton Chigurh, he almost has like a sound dampening effect as an individual. Like, he just like sucks the
Yeah.
sound out of a room. That scene in the gas station is incredible. You described it with the crinkling of the wrapper. It just like you can feel it expand and make each one of those little crinkles as it's going. It's just incredible. And I think another contributing factor to the feel, that tone that we talked about in this movie, there's a sense of dread, I think, throughout it. You're always sort of a
Yeah.
little afraid. You're a little like anything could happen, and something terrible seems to, like, like it could happen any moment. And I think right from the moment that Llewellyn goes back with the water, all semblance of control is gone from this movie. We are just hurtling forward, and there's no veering from it. And I think that lack of control, that idea that we're being propelled forward, is really important to the movie, and it's really important to the characters of Llewellyn and Anton both.
I'd even argue that it was before the water. It was the moment he found the satchel, and
Hmm.
there's a line in the book that says the moment he kind of finds it. It says he sat there looking at it, and then he closed the flap and sat with his head down. His whole life was sitting there in front of him, and that's the inciting incident for Llewellyn, is when he chooses to take the bag.
Hmm.
Even though, as you mentioned in the rundown, he does actually seem to have a happy life. Like when he first gets home, we first get introduced to Carla Jean. They have that like little witty banter, like, I'm gonna take you back and screw you, and she's like, well, you try it, like they seem to really like love each other, and
They
like,
do, yeah. No, they definitely do.
you know, and then that choice leads to a lack of control throughout, as you mentioned, like throughout the rest of the movie, and which is interesting when talking about Chigurh, as he seems to leave so much up to fate. And he's a character that is sort of driven by his own moral code, even though it's as fucked up of a moral code as that is. He kind of leaves it up to fate sometimes, and that's like, as we see in the final moments in the film with Carla Jean when he kills her. And then
Hmm.
also, as we mentioned earlier, with that scene with the gas station scene, which is my favorite scene in the whole film, one of my favorite scenes in all of movies. and it's just brilliant.
Yeah, going back to that gas station scene again, you hear Anton say when he's threatening this poor old man this, who's just trying to run his service station,
I know, right?
he says to him, I got here the same way the coin did. He's presented him with the coin flip option, which he does another, twice in the movie. And basically, like it's intimated that he's flipping for his life. And
Right.
he says, I got here the same way the coin did. You know, even this guy who seems perfectly in control, perhaps not in control of his homicidal urges, but he is
Right.
supremely calm when he kills people. Even this guy recognizes that he's just a coin in circulation. He comes to an eventual point brought there by forces and tides and a vast network of choices, not his own. It's a really
Yeah.
interesting perspective for a person to have.
And I mean that I don't know what the actor's name is they use, but like that, it's so great, that scene, and how they're playing off of one another. And we really start to see, this psychotic character that is Anton come out,
Mm-hmm.
and how he can switch. Don't put it in your pocket. That's your lucky coin, sir. Where should I put it? Anywhere but your pocket. It'll get lost with the other coins, and it'll be another coin, which it is. You know what I mean?
Of course it is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, it's such great writing, but just such, again, you're feeling this suspense because you know what this person is capable of, but then you also are just like, well, then is he really just leaving this all up to chance? Like, what kind of psycho would do that?
Only a Batman villain, I guess, or Anton Chigurh. He kind of does the Two-Face trope. It's interesting, and you see it again in the end with Carla Jean, as we mentioned. And this sort of goes to his sense of principle, because she doesn't have the money, and Llewellyn is already dead, but he still feels he needs to kill her because he had presented Llewellyn with the option that, he could have taken this course of action, which would have saved Carla Jean. He didn't. So now, regardless of whatever else has happened, he's got to kill her. And she says to him, as multiple people do in this film, she says, you don't have to do this. And he finds that so perplexing. And so he offers her the coin flip. And she says, of course, the coin doesn't have a say. It's all up to you. And again, he says, well, I got here the same way the coin did. And I think for this character, the idea of free will is kind of illusory. We're no more in control than a coin in our pocket. And I think life to him is probably just a series of cosmic coin flips. And the best we can do is call it when it lands. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the subtlety in that scene is so heartbreaking too. And we know she's going to die because we know what he's capable of.
Sure.
And we know there's nothing she can do to kind of change his mind. And hence why they never show him killing her, because it's too tragic. And it's just that little moment of, we know it when he walks out of the house and he just looks at the bottom of his boots. Like that's just brilliant filmmaking to me. You're sort of just brought to the outside of the house. You're like, oh, did he kill her? Like, what happened? Like, you're so like on edge. And then when he looks at the boots, you're like, oh yeah. Like, how can you convey that he's like, oh, did I step in blood? Are my boots dirty? Like, no, it's so sad, and she's the only sort of lasting positive part of this film, right? Like she's done nothing wrong. She's innocent. She's very sweet and loving, but it's like, well, she still gets killed.
Yeah, and I guess again that's sort of speaking to the lack of control. Like her influence on this situation was nil. She did nothing wrong,
right?
But she's drawn up in it just the same as anybody. Now, this book and film did not get their title by accident. For anyone unfamiliar with late 19th and early 20th century Irish poetry, William Butler Yeats opens his famous poem "Sailing to Byzantium" with the line, "That is no country for old men." And the poem, which I will now brutally summarize, has a lot to do with aging and dying, the difference between our youth and our elders, the impermanence of our lives, and our attempts at immortality through achievement or religion, what have you. But the first stanza, which opens with the "No country" line, I think is also saying that the old and the young almost live in two different worlds. That the young occupy the moment, while the old concern themselves with the past and ways of thwarting the future, which always contains death. And there's this sense from the character of Ed, the Tommy Lee Jones
Yeah.
character, the sheriff, that as he's aged, the world has changed radically around him. You hear him talk about that quite a bit. Do you think the world has changed for him and for us, or do we just age out of the world over time?
I think it's a common occurrence, with every generation. Everybody talks about sort of the younger generation and how they're changing for the worse. But a lot of it, as you mentioned, just is getting older, and there's this idea in the film that we're following these three characters on three separate journeys, but they're all linked to this crime that's gone wrong. But for Ed, he's always one step behind. It's like this changing of the world around him.
Mm.
And, I think he's trying to catch up, as he is doing throughout the film, especially with Llewellyn. And he's trying to help him and try not to like go down the same mistakes that he's made, the same past wrongs. But he just, to no luck, he can't get there. And there's a duality in the film that's ever present, and these characters kind of are repeating these same moments, and you sort of see that with all three characters, really. Like, it's interesting, there's the moment at the end where Anton gets hit by the car and he buys the shirt off the kid. Earlier in the film, Llewellyn buys the shirt off the young kid. There's this part where they're drinking, where Anton shows up at the trailer and he takes out and he has the milk and he sort of like sits there with the glass of milk. And then later in the film, Ed and the cop partner show up at the trailer and he sits down and he drinks a glass of milk. There's this kind of repeating, ideas constantly throughout the film. And even Ed, when he talks to the old guy in the trailer, sort of a retired cop who's kind of been paralyzed. And then before that, he's talks to the other cop that's sort of like that other sheriff, I guess. And he's like, they're walking around with green hair and bones in their noses. And he's like, listen, when they stop saying sir and ma'am, that's it. That's like the end of it, so that's ever present. There's this idea of life repeating itself, but it's like you're sort of stuck in your own world and your own life, and you're going to constantly look back at other generations and think how different and wrong they are.
Yeah, his struggle in this movie seems to be a lot about reckoning with the world as it has become, or possibly as he has become. And he talks about his inability to understand modernity on a few occasions. In his opening monologue, he says, the crime you see, it's hard to take its measure. It's not that I'm afraid of it. I just don't understand it. A man would have to put his soul at hazard. He'd have to say, okay, I'll be a part of this world. And it seems like he's lived past the point where he can be a part of it. He sort of reached this point where he's more interested in what was than what was coming. And yeah, there is often this like you say, like every generation thinks the next one is doomed and that that they're totally, beyond salvation. People said it about us. We'll say it about the kids now. And it's, if you look back through history, every generation has always freaking said it. So it's fascinating that there is that just continuation of the same idea.
And that's why the time period is so great in this film, because, it was the rise of that drug trade and the Mexican cartels around that time, right? And it just speaks to the changing of the times. The even changing of what crimes are committed, and something the Ed character just can't comprehend or understand. There is sort of like a feeling that this film is a bit timeless, like you can't really place it. Like, yeah, there's no new technology in it, but it feels like it's still kind of can happen any time a bit. But this specific moment in time in like around the 1980s, where this drug kind of trade was taking off, especially in that area of the United States, it was impactful. Was an impactful setting for the film.
That scene, you mentioned it, where he goes to see the retired cop. He's in a wheelchair,
Right.
and I think I think that scene really gives you the film's opinion, because Ed tells him that he feels overmatched by what he's facing today,
Mm.
the level of crime, the sort of the the new form criminality has taken on. And so this guy tells him that story about a lawman who, from 1909, who gets shot on his own porch by these guys who just sit there and watch him die while his wife agonizes over him. And I think he's telling us the world's always been a mess, and every generation thinks that the next will be the ruin of us all. And like I said, this movie was set in the 80s, and we look back now in our youth in the 80s and 90s, and we think of it as idyllic.
Mm-hmm.
And, but at the time, the people of the generation before us was saying how insane we were, and now we're saying the same thing about the
Right.
Zoomers and on down the line. And I think it's another example of inevitability in the film, that the world will always leave us behind, and all we can do is kind of admonish it and lament the arrow of time.
Yeah, and I did want to mention that old retired lawman kind of in the wheelchair. Yeah, he's so great, and like all these little bit roles are so
Yeah.
great. I mentioned and they're the Coens are so good at casting, and all these choices they make are so interesting. Down to like the gas store, like I mentioned, the gas station clerk. He's got such a great look. There's that woman in the trailer park attendant when she's filing her nails. She's like, I can't tell you, sir. Like, she is so good. The
Yeah.
pool girl at the end who's like, I got beers in my room. Like, come get
I
some
know what beers
beers.
lead to.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Bear
They're
leads to
all
more
these
bear.
That's right. All these unique characters, and they have such a good look, and they just add to the tone and the authenticity of the film. And this is something we complained about with other filmmakers, where they're just like, oh, now I'm going to cast this massive star in this like bit role. That's like, who cares, right? And even Brolin in the lead. This was like this was before he was a massive star, before he was in all the Marvel movies. He was a child actor from
Mm-hmm.
my favorite movie of all time, The Goonies. He was the
Course.
older brother Bran.
Mm-hmm.
But like at this point in his career, he was like doing, random roles here and there, but he wasn't a big star. He'd become a day trader at this point,
Oh, wow.
as well as an actor. And, he got the audition for this role, but they were seeing everybody. They had cast Tommy Lee Jones. They had cast Javier Bardem, but they needed sort of this everyman kind of, a very unique everyman that sort of could pull off being almost like a cowboy. And he was working on the Grindhouse film, which was the double feature with Robert Rodriguez and Tarantino.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually got Tarantino to shoot his audition for this role.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, and the Coen brothers looked at the tape and they were like, God, this is shot so good. It was like on a video camera or whatever, but
Yeah.
they just like were blown away by how good it was shot. And it wasn't until later that they realized, or that he told them, they was like, yeah, Tarantino shot that. It's like, oh my God. Yeah, but he didn't actually even get the role at that point. They were like, no, this is good, but like, we're good. And then he was like, somehow, I guess he convinced his agent to convince them. They were like, please let him come in and read for you. Because they liked the tape, but they were just like, yeah, it's not exactly what we're looking for. And then during the actual in-person audition, they were blown away. So, but that really sparked the kind of second half of his career, because then he did W, and then he did, like I said, all the Marvel movies, and he's
Sicario.
He's been kind of Sicario. He's been a big,
Dune.
sort of a big deal now. Ever since.
Right.
Exactly.
Huge deal.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And it's so amazing that like you could think of anyone else in this role other than him. He is just so perfect. I love him in this. He's got some absolutely incredible lines, and he delivers them impeccably. When I was researching this, I came across a Reddit thread with the title, "Great Movie, Terrible Ending." And yeah, I know, I was a little surprised too. And the reason given was twofold. So one,
Okay.
this person felt that a lot of the resolution of the characters happens off screen. Llewellyn and Carla Jean both die unseen by
Sure.
us, and they felt that was unsatisfying. And two, they didn't like the end where Ed describes his very cryptic dream before the film just blinks to black. Did either of those things bother you?
No, absolutely not. I
Mm.
love both those parts. Um, it's interesting when kind of Llewellyn dies, the fade out always interested me when I first saw it. Like, so he's talking to the pool girl, and then he's sort of like smiling, and then there's this like literally it fades out. It doesn't cut,
Mm-hmm.
and then it cuts to Ed driving, and you see the kind of the Mexican cartel guys blasting out, and then
Yeah.
he goes and finds him dead.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting choice, and it's obviously very deliberate choice. And I get why people could be a bit upset that you don't get to see his final demise.
Because this is
But
our lead,
there's
right? Like, I mean, this is our
yeah,
protagonist, so to not see
yeah,
it seems a choice, an interesting choice.
yeah. It's absolutely, and there is, you know, it sort of also leans into the idea that this is the final transition into like Ed sort of becomes the main character then for the rest of the
Right.
film, and
Yeah.
there's not a ton of the film left, but we sort of end up with him for kind of the last half an hour. And it's just bucking the norm, right? And it's making the audience sort of do a double take, right? Be like, oh my gosh, is that Llewellyn? Did he actually die? It makes it even more surprising. It's not supposed to happen that way. And furthermore, you mentioned Carla Jean's death, and we know that she's gonna be killed, and it's as I mentioned, it's sort of that final little bit of innocence, and it's just her death is really the saddest, of the whole thing. And what I'll say about that final monologue by Ed, it was pulled directly from the book, and it's very poetic. And I think Tommy Lee Jones's delivery is just so perfect for it, and you can just feel the weight of it. And I know from researching, he practiced that for weeks and weeks and had it down perfectly. And I think the Coen brothers just sort of like loved it so much, his delivery and everything about it, that they were like, well, we're not gonna change anything about it. It felt so powerful and heavy.
It is interesting. It didn't really occur to me until you said this now, that the youth of this movie, Llewellyn and Carla Jean, die, and it's Tommy Lee, it's Ed, the older, the elder sort of member of the cast who lives on, and there's tragedy in that too, because this should be their time, they had this opportunity too, to make off with 2 million and have a great life, and it's all just. No, like, I mean, there's nothing just about any of this, that
Right.
they should die when Tommy Lee lives. And I think that's another sort of example of the film telling us that the world doesn't have any sort of notion of fairness or control. Again, it's this lack of control and the randomness of existence. And it does not bother me either of those things. Either, like, I don't think there's a problem with not seeing their deaths. First of all, we've seen enough death in this movie that I don't think we don't need another murder scene. I think, like you described, him checking his boots was such a really, really nice way of telling us that he did the deed when Anton leaves the house. And Tommy Lee is so frigging good. I could listen to him describe enigmatic old cowboy dreams all goddamn day. And, naturally the dream itself is important. And this is another continuation of the idea that the world leaves us behind, because what he describes is that he has this image of his father who's riding out into the darkness with a light, and his father is waiting for him out there. He'll be there when he catches up to him. But our past is not out there waiting for us. It's gone. And our obsession with it is part of why we get left behind by modernity. This is why we feel like the world has changed so much, because we're not keeping pace with it. We're still thinking about what's behind. And Tommy Lee, the character, is always talking about the old timers and how much he admires and romanticizes the past. And I
Hmm.
think I think it is that. It's a very hard thing not to do, but I think it is that that often leaves us. That's why we get left behind by the world, because we are so focused on the past.
Yeah, I agree completely with everything you said. I'll also add that, like, I love when he's starting to describe it, and he's saying he sees his dad as, and he's lived I don't know what he says, 20 years past what his dad lived. So he's like,
Yeah,
now he's the old man, and it's like,
exactly.
oh, that is just so brilliant to think about.
Hmm.
It's great. So we're getting to that point of the episode where I gotta know if this has a lot of strong elements to it, but does it fit being a hell of a pitcher for you?
Yeah, we need to do a bunch more brothers films, because I really want to know what their best film is for me. If you had asked me a few weeks ago, I think I'd have said Lebowski.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but if you're asking me today, I think I might say this. But that's recency bias for you. I'd be interested to know how much of the dialogue was taken from the book and how much was a Coen creation, because boy, there are some gems in here. Llewellyn
Yeah.
and I mean, all of them are just a font of absolutely poignant, you know, dialogue. It's incredible. I could listen to these people talk all day, and we talked about the tone of the film, that sense of dread, this inexorable hurtling ahead, the themes and ideas. I think it's pretty brilliant, just top to bottom. Hell of a picture for me, and I'm so glad it won Best Picture. Very deserving.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I Coen brothers are really amazing filmmakers, and they've made some bangers, and but I also like they've made some duds too, which is so great, and I think that's the sign of a good filmmaker. We've talked a lot about filmmakers in the past, or filmmakers on this podcast, people like Tarantino, where I don't think Tarantino's made a bad movie, but I think he is like, you know, that is not normal. I think it's good
Mm,
when filmmakers take big swings, and sometimes they miss. And they've done that, but they took a big swing with this movie, and boy did they ever hit. And it is it stays with you, and you kind of watch it over and over, and you find new things about it, and you find new things to focus on, and you find these interesting characters, and you watch it this time, and you're sort of obsessed with Llewellyn's character, and like the decisions he makes, and then the next time you watch it, you're really keen on Ed's decisions, and then what's driving Anton, and it's just, you can watch this movie again and again and keep finding new ways to take it in, and it's pretty powerful. Hell of a picture for me as well, without a doubt. And I'm pretty sure it probably stays in my top 10 of all time. But you're
mm.
definitely right. I think more Coen brothers are in our future, because they've made some bangers, and like I said, they've made some great movies. They've made some okay movies. They've made some duds, and it'd be interesting to sort of stack them up against each other. Um, so yeah, we're getting to the end of this best picture run. We have the 2010s left. We're not going to do the 2020s, because obviously we're in the 2020s. We could do one from the first 5 years, but I think we put a cap in this run of best pictures in the 2010s. And Dave, can you let everybody know what we're going to be doing next episode?
Yeah, the 2020s are a wretched dumpster fire, so we'll just stay away from it. It's a horrible, horrible place to be. But next week, we will concern ourselves with the 2010s, and we will be talking about the 2014 Best Picture winner, Birdman, starring Michael Keaton, directed by, please forgive my pronunciation of this, but Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu. Again, forgive me. Never seen this one. Very excited to watch it, because, man, I love Michael Keaton so goddamn much.
Man, I'm so stoked for you to see this. It's been a many years since I've seen this movie. I'm stoked to revisit it. I'm not, don't read anything about it before you watch it. Don't,
No
I think you
worries.
probably forgot. And it's brilliant how they shoot it, how they make the film. It is deserving of the best picture, I feel. And it's definitely a, unique best picture, one sort of that you wouldn't expect to be sort of in the running, but
Oh, I love
so
when
well
that
done.
happens. I love when that
I know. And
happens.
you're kind of like, oh, this is what the route they decided to make this film. And yeah, Keaton is peak Keaton in this. So it's going to be fun.
Awesome.
But Birdman, so Birdman's coming in our next episode. Just to fill everybody in, so David and I are we've been doing this weekly now for almost a year. We're almost 50 episodes in, and we love doing it. We're going to keep doing it, but we are going to kind of shift a little bit to every second week. So we're still going to be putting in all the time and commitment it is to recording all the episodes, but we have lots of projects in the works that we want to make sure that we allow one another to kind of get to and do. So you can still expect us to come up on your feeds, but just once every 2 weeks. So if you're a day one hell of a picture follower, just know that we're not stopping doing the podcast. We're just going to be dropping ones every 2 weeks. And if you feel the need to see our faces or hear our voices, just go back through the old library. There's over 50 episodes, and there's lots of other movies to choose from.
Absolutely. Yep. And yeah, it's the content, is as you say, it's evergreen, and there's no harm in giving it a re-listen. You might find something that you missed out on initially, or maybe you skipped an episode because you hadn't seen the movie in a while. You get a chance to see the movie, go back, give it a listen, and enjoy.
Yeah, 100%. All right. So for David Hollinshurst, my name is Andrew Bartlett, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with Birdman. And this has been another terrifying, suspenseful episode of Hell of a Picture.